Why was she still breathing? 14 bullets had torn through her body on a nameless street in East Mosul, and yet the world refused to let her slip away. The smell of cordite clung to the shattered air. Dust drifted like snow over broken brick. Staff Sergeant Ramirez pressed her cheek to the crumbling concrete, tasting copper and grit, every breath a shallow gamble. She should have been dead already. Somewhere behind her an M4 barked, then fell silent, jammed or silenced by return fire. The next crack of an AK-47 shattered a window overhead, showering her helmet with glass. Her right hand still held her rifle, though she wasn't sure if her fingers felt the trigger or only remembered it. Pain was everywhere and nowhere, sharp in flashes, distant in waves. It was her training that held her together now, the discipline that had been beaten into her on sweltering Paris Island mornings. Stay awake, stay lethal, stay Marine. The memory of 2 funerals the week before clawed at her. Corporal Jennings, Lance Corporal Ruiz. Roadside bombs had taken them, and Alina had promised herself it wouldn't be her turn. She had told her mother, "I'll be careful." But care was useless when the ambush came with surgical precision, insurgents waiting where intelligence had said it was clear. She felt the betrayal before she could name it. Through a haze of dust, movement flickered at a second-story window. A kid, no older than 16, in a faded Manchester United jersey, cradling a rifle that looked too big for his narrow shoulders. Alina steadied her sights despite the tremor in her wounded arm. 2 controlled squeezes and the boy dropped out of view. She wanted to feel something, regret, anger, anything. But the numbness inside was worse than the pain. "Marine down, Marine down." Hawkins's voice cracked over the comm, taut with panic he didn't have time to show. "Negative," she rasped, forcing air past blood in her throat. "Hold position. Call for backup." She tasted iron and dust. Another volley slammed into the wall beside her. Shards of stone nicked her cheek. Her mind splintered into snapshots, her brother's crooked grin in a letter from home, her father's sealed trident gleaming on an old uniform, her mother's face under a graduation cap in the humid South Carolina heat. The 14th round struck her temple like a tap from a lover's hand, gentle, final. Darkness feathered the edges of her vision, but the world didn't fade completely. Marines weren't supposed to quit. She forced her thumb to the radio one last time. "Hawkins," a swallow of blood. "Tell my mother," the words dissolved before she could finish. She counted her remaining rounds. 2 magazines. If they came close to confirm the kill, she'd make them pay for the privilege. The crunch of boots on broken glass told her the moment was near. She drew a shallow breath, adjusted her grip, and waited. Hours blurred. A Blackhawk's rotors thumped overhead like distant thunder. Hands firm but careful lifted her onto a stretcher. Chief Petty Officer Winters's voice cut through the fog. 14 confirmed hits, BP 70 over 40. How is she still with us? The helicopter shuddered skyward, Baghdad's horizon painted in fire and smoke. Commander Sarah Chen's gloved hands moved like music under harsh surgical lights. "She's lost 40% blood volume," Chen said quietly. "By every standard, she should be gone." The corpsman at her side whispered what everyone felt. "Because she's a Marine, ma'am." In the waiting room, Hawkins sat hunched, dust still clinging to his gear. Alina's blood dried on his sleeves. He replayed every second, the too quiet street, the perfect angles of crossfire. This wasn't chance. Someone had known exactly where her team would be. His gaze fell on her personal effects, dog tags, a photo of her mother, a waterproof pouch. Inside, a folded paper, Arabic script on one side, a hand-drawn map on the other. Not a love letter, not a keepsake, a secret. The radio on his chest crackled. Lieutenant Sullivan's voice carried the weight of 2 wars. "Hawkins, we secured the ambush site. You need to see this." 4 hours later, Sullivan's weathered face hovered over satellite photos lit by a single desk lamp. The airstrike had collapsed half the building, but the recovered materials told a deeper story. Surveillance photos of Ramirez, timestamps matching her patrols, and a leather-bound logbook marking Marine movements over 3 months. Among the debris, a scorched but legible header from a U.S. classified document dated 1991. Sullivan's gut twisted. He'd served in Desert Storm. He knew what shouldn't be here. She wasn't in the wrong place at the wrong time, he murmured, watching Elena's unconscious body through the ICU window. They were hunting her. In recovery, Elena floated in morphine-hazed memories. Her father's deep laugh when she first shouldered a .22, the way he'd avoided talking about Iraq, the interpreter in Mosul's market who had pressed a folded document into her palm with trembling fingers. "Your father would want you to have this," he'd whispered before vanishing into the crowd. She hadn't opened it then. There hadn't been time. Her eyes flickered open. Hawkins was there, slouched in a chair, exhaustion carved into the lines of his face. "The document," she croaked, voice raw. "It's secure," Hawkins replied, then leaned close. "But we need to talk about where you got it." "Interpreter," she whispered. "Mosul," said my father. Pain forced her eyes shut. Hawkins's jaw tightened. "Your father was SEAL Team 3, Desert Storm, Marco Ramirez. Half his records are classified." The door opened softly. Lieutenant Sullivan stepped in, hat tucked under his arm, face as grave as a funeral. "Staff Sergeant, I won't keep you long, but there's something you need to hear. The building where you were ambushed wasn't just an insurgent nest. It was an intelligence cache. They've been watching you for months, and they're calling you," he hesitated, as if speaking the name would make it too real. "The Babylon daughter." Elena blinked, confusion cutting through the morphine fog. "I don't understand." "Neither do we," Sullivan admitted. "But it ties to something called Operation Babylon, Desert Storm, off-the-books missions involving chemical weapons sites. Your father's name shows up in fragments we recovered." The room's silence was heavy enough to bend steel. "Why would insurgents care about a mission from 16 years ago?" Elena asked, more to herself than to them. Hawkins exchanged a look with Sullivan. "That's what we're going to find out." Hours later, Baghdad's dawn bled pale light over blast walls and razor wire. A Blackhawk waited to ferry Ramirez to the Green Zone's military hospital. Captain Sarah Reynolds, a Desert Storm veteran herself, supervised the transfer personally. As medics strapped Elena to the litter, Reynolds whispered to the flight surgeon, 14 gunshots and she's still talking. That's not tough, that's a miracle." Elena stirred, eyes fluttering open. "Miracles are overrated," she muttered, then slipped back into uneasy sleep. The helicopter skimmed low over the desert, its rotors chopping the air like a distant drumbeat. Hawkins kept a protective hand on the litter's frame, gaze fixed on the horizon, but thoughts on the folded document locked in Sullivan's safe. Somewhere in that paper was the reason his Marine had been marked for death. When they landed, an armed escort waited, too large for a routine patient transfer. Lieutenant Colonel Green's expression was grim as he greeted Reynolds outside the ICU. "Intel suggests they're already moving assets into Baghdad. This wasn't just an ambush. It's something bigger." Inside, monitors beeped softly. Elena's chest rose and fell with mechanical regularity, but her mind refused to rest. In the spaces between morphine dreams, she saw flashes. Her father slipping an old footlocker under her childhood bed, the interpreter's urgent eyes, the whispered phrase that lingered like a ghost, "Your father would want you to have this." She woke to Reynolds checking her vitals. "Baghdad Military Hospital," the captain said gently. "Security detail." Elena's voice was hoarse. "Platoon outside. Someone thinks you're worth protecting," Reynolds said. Elena's gaze hardened. "Or worth killing." As Reynolds adjusted an IV line, an alarm shrieked. Elena's blood pressure plummeted. Her heart raced. Doctors swarmed, checking lines, fluids, wounds. No bleed, no infection, nothing obvious, yet her body was crashing. Within minutes, the crisis passed as mysteriously as it came. Reynolds's eyes narrowed. "Run a full toxicology panel," she ordered, "and test every IV bag she's touched." Hawkins arrived to find Marines posted inside and outside Elena's room. Reynolds briefed him quietly. "There's no medical reason for that episode. If someone tried to finish what Mosul started, this hospital just became another battlefield. Outside, the city's morning call to prayer mingled with distant rotor thumps. Inside, a wounded Marine opened her eyes, determination flaring through the fog of morphine. She'd been hunted across borders, left for dead, and targeted again on a hospital bed. But the game wasn't finished. Some debts still needed paying, and Alina Ramirez intended to collect. Why would anyone risk an entire city block just to erase a wounded Marine? The question looped through Lieutenant Sullivan's mind as he studied the recovered photos by the light of a single desk lamp. Surveillance angles that only professionals would choose, dates matching Ramirez's patrol routes down to the hour, and that single, burned fragment of a U.S. classified header, 1991, mocking him from the evidence bag. Down the hall, Alina's room was quiet except for the soft rhythm of a heart monitor. Hawkins stood watch at her bedside, rifle propped against the wall. He wasn't officially posted there. Hospital security was the Marine detail outside, but he couldn't bring himself to leave. Every time her breathing hitched, he flinched. He'd carried Marines out of firefights before, but never someone who'd absorbed 14 bullets and still refused to quit. At dawn, Sullivan slipped into the room. The sun's first light filtered through the reinforced glass, catching on the bandage at Alina's temple. "Morning, Staff Sergeant," he said softly. Her eyelids fluttered. "Operational," she whispered, Marine humor curling at the edge of pain. Sullivan pulled a chair beside her bed, his lined face carved by old campaigns. "We intercepted more comms overnight. They don't believe you died in Mosul. They're preparing a second attempt." Her gaze sharpened through the haze of painkillers. Inside the green zone. "They have help," Sullivan said. He glanced at Hawkins, then lowered his voice. "We think there's an insider, maybe more than one." Hawkins stiffened. The Baghdad hospital was supposed to be untouchable, safe ground amid chaos. If enemies could breach this, nowhere was safe. Alina's fingers twitched toward the rails of her bed. "Then let's use me," she said, her voice rough but steady. "Bait." Hawkins's head snapped toward her. "Absolutely not. You're barely conscious." "Barely conscious Marines still pull triggers," she shot back. "You need eyes they won't expect. Someone they're already desperate to kill." Sullivan didn't answer immediately. His weathered eyes measured her the way he'd measured countless battlefields. He'd seen Marines fight on broken legs, on no legs. He also knew courage could tip into recklessness. "We'll move you at dawn tomorrow," he said finally. "Decoy convoy out front, real transport through the tunnels. It buys us time." She held his gaze. "Or we finish it now." The room fell silent except for the beep of her heart monitor and the distant murmur of hospital life. Outside, the city stirred, unaware of the storm coiling in its streets. By afternoon, Colonel Thompson had flown in from Camp Victory, a silver-haired veteran whose very posture carried 3 wars' worth of ghosts. He gathered Sullivan, Hawkins, Reynolds, and a few trusted intelligence officers in a small conference room. A single map of Baghdad lay under a dim light, corners curling from the heat. "They called her Babylon daughter again," Thompson said without preamble, "and something else, Protocol Epsilon." The words hung in the air like a live grenade. Hawkins frowned. "Never heard of it." Sullivan's eyes narrowed. "Desert Storm rumor. A contingency plan if proof of Western involvement with Saddam's chemical programs ever surfaced." Thompson's jaw flexed. It was more than rumor. He looked at each of them in turn. Marco Ramirez, her father, was part of a SEAL team sent to Facility 107 on the Syria-Iraq border. Official mission, destroy a chemical weapons plant. Unofficial, secure documentation implicating Western companies and possibly agencies. The team was compromised. Ramirez disappeared for 6 months. When he came back, half the files were missing. "And now they think Alina has them," Hawkins said quietly. "She doesn't," Sullivan countered. "She didn't even know." "That doesn't matter," Thompson replied. Belief is enough to kill for. In her room, Alina drifted between pain and clarity. She watched a nurse adjust her IV, the Marine guard outside silhouetted against the hall's fluorescent light. Somewhere deep in her chest, a pressure built, a blend of fear and fury. She thought of her father's laugh, the way he'd tucked her under a blanket during desert campouts back home, whispering, "Some secrets stay buried, Mija." She never asked what he meant. The next morning, Baghdad's sky was a pale wash of gold. The decoy convoy rumbled out of the hospital gates, an armored ambulance, 2 gun trucks, a heavy security escort. Every movement was textbook, visible, loud bait. But on the 4th floor, in a cleared patient room with its blinds drawn, Alina lay prone behind a borrowed M4 fitted with her preferred optic. The window overlooked the convoy's route. Hawkins crouched nearby, scanning with binoculars. 2 other Marines covered the door. She swallowed against the dryness in her throat. The stitches pulled at her skin. Pain pulsed in her hip and shoulder. She ignored it. "Overwatch in position," she transmitted. Her voice was steady, betraying nothing. Outside, the convoy rolled past a cluster of bombed-out apartments. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then a glint, a fraction of sunlight on glass, flared in her scope. RPG. Left flank, 2nd floor, white curtain. "Contact front," she whispered, exhaling as she squeezed the trigger. The shooter dropped before his finger reached his trigger. Another figure darted behind a rusted car. Another squeezed down. The convoy kept rolling, oblivious to how close death had crept. But the attackers adapted. Muzzle flashes flickered from new angles, stitching bullets across her window frame. Plaster dust rained over her rifle. "They've got your position," Hawkins warned. "Let them come," she replied and fired again. The hospital shuddered under the impact of a mortar round. Glass exploded inward. Hawkins dragged her back from the window as shards peppered her body armor. The roar of Apache split the sky, their 30 cannons shredding the ambush below. Smoke boiled upward, black against the Baghdad sun. As medics patched reopened wounds, Alina clenched her jaw. Being hunted once had been bad enough. Twice was unforgivable. She wasn't waiting for a third. By nightfall, Marine raiders were moving into position, silent, efficient, men who'd carved their reputations on impossible missions. Master Sergeant Jason Carter, broad-shouldered and watchful, introduced himself with a nod. "Heard you don't go down easy," he said. "Depends who's shooting," Alina answered, managing a faint smirk. Carter's eyes softened just slightly. "We're going hunting, you in?" She met his gaze, always. The operation planning room was lit only by tablets and a single overhead bulb. Satellite images of the Syria-Iraq border sprawled across the table. Objective Sigma, a converted oil station, pulsed red on the map. 35 hostiles, mixed composition, Carter briefed. Former Republican Guard, foreign fighters, maybe Western contractors. Alpha team sets a perimeter. Bravo breaches, secures intel. Staff Sergeant Ramirez rides with Bravo for identification. Sullivan shifted uneasily. "She's barely out of surgery." "She's the only one who can recognize half of what we're after," Carter replied. His voice wasn't harsh, just matter of fact. "And whoever's running this won't expect her to walk into their house." Thompson studied Alina. "Your father's shadow is long. This might be our only shot at answers." She nodded once, the weight of her father's secrets pressing on her chest. She wasn't doing this for glory or even revenge. She was doing it because 5 Marines lay dead outside a medical station that should have been safe. Because an interpreter had trusted her with his life in a crowded market. Because her father's eyes, warm and burdened, haunted her dreams. 2 hours before midnight, Baghdad glowed faintly beyond the blast walls. The Blackhawks waited on the pad, rotors whispering against the night. As she climbed aboard, pain flared with each movement, but she didn't flinch. Marines had a saying, "Pain is weakness leaving the body." Tonight, weakness would leave quietly, if at all. The helicopter banked low over the desert, lights off. skimming the earth to avoid radar. Inside, silence reigned except for the soft crackle of the intercom. Carter reviewed the target one last time, his finger tracing routes on the tablet's map. Alina checked her rifle, then the secure hard drive pouch on her vest. Somewhere in that Syrian outpost lay proof of betrayal older than her career, proof her father had once carried through a war and died keeping. She thought of her mother back in New Mexico, probably asleep under the same roof as her father's footlocker. She thought of the folded paper Hawkins had locked away. And she wondered, when this was over, if it ever really could be over. What kind of country buries its mistakes beneath generations of silence? The Blackhawks dropped altitude, the desert stretching endless and black beneath them. Carter's voice came calm and measured through the headset. 2 minutes to drop. Lock and load. Hawkins's voice followed, tight with controlled resolve. Stay close, Ramirez. Your job is eyes, not heroics. But as the landing skids kissed the wadi's floor and boots hit the sand, Alina felt a grim certainty settle over her. She'd been the prey long enough. Tonight, the hunter stepped out of her father's shadow. The raiders fanned out, night vision goggles glowing faintly. The dry air tasted of dust and secrets. Ahead, Objective Sigma waited, a quiet silhouette against the Syrian hills. Somewhere inside, men whispered in languages of war and profit, confident their secrets were safe. They didn't know a wounded Marine had crossed the desert to collect a debt. What kind of ghosts waited behind those walls? The thought flickered through Alina's mind as she crouched in the wadi's shadows, the desert night pressing close. The raiders moved with silent precision, 8 figures slipping between stones, rifles cradled, every step rehearsed in muscle memory. Above, the stars burned cold and bright, indifferent to the secrets men killed to protect. Carter raised a fist, halting the column. The dry wind whispered over the sand, carrying the faint metallic rattle of a chain-link fence ahead. Through her NVGs, Alina saw the outline of Objective Sigma, 4 squat buildings clustered around a central courtyard. A communications tower loomed like a broken spear against the horizon. Sullivan's voice came through the headset, low and steady. Alpha's in position, perimeter secure. Copy, Carter replied. Bravo moves on my mark. He glanced at Alina. You good? Her body ached with every heartbeat. Her hip throbbed where bone fragments still floated, but she met his gaze. I'm good. They advanced in bounding movements, using storage containers and rusted vehicles for cover. Twice, guards passed within 10 meters, cigarettes glowing like fireflies. The raiders froze, breaths shallow, until the men wandered off, oblivious. At the perimeter fence, a specialist produced cutters wrapped in black tape to muffle the snip of steel. One by one, they slipped through the opening. Alina's heart hammered, not from fear, but from the sharpened clarity that came only before a fight. The communication center loomed ahead, a squat concrete box with a single light above the rear door. Carter signaled halt, then waved forward the tech specialist, who interfaced a small device with the keypad lock. 30 seconds later, the door clicked. Carter eased it open, muzzle sweeping the corridor beyond. Inside, the building smelled of dust, oil, and stale smoke. Their boots whispered across the tile. They passed darkened rooms filled with silent radios and sleeping monitors, the hum of unseen servers faint under the desert quiet. Alina's pulse quickened when she spotted the second door half ajar, maps, photos, documents lining its walls. Her father's ghost lived here. She felt it in her bones. Hold, she whispered, pointing. Carter peered in, then signaled 2 raiders to clear it. Suppressed rifles whispered twice, 2 guards crumpled before they could breathe a warning. Carter ushered her inside. The room was an intelligence officer's dream and a soldier's nightmare. Maps of Iraq, Syria, and Jordan covered one wall, studded with red pins marking past attacks and blue pins for future targets. A yellowed satellite image of Facility 107 stared back at her like an accusation. Beside it, personnel files, her father's photo, her own service record, surveillance shots of her buying coffee on base, laughing with Hawkins leading patrols. Her throat tightened. They've been watching me longer than I've been watching them. She steadied her hands and began photographing everything. Each shutter click was a heartbeat, a silent promise. Proof mattered more than revenge, more than survival. Proof could outlive them all. Carter joined her, scanning documents. "These aren't amateurs," he muttered. "Look, auth forms signed by Western contractors, Babylon Protocol signatures." At a desk, she spotted a folder stamped "Top Secret Babylon Protocol." Inside were shipping manifests for dual-use chemicals, memos implicating Western companies, and, most damning, letters bearing official seals. She felt her father's presence as if he stood beside her, urging her hands to move faster. "Movement North Corridor," whispered the rear guard through comms. "6 tangos closing." Carter's jaw tightened. "Finish the download," he ordered. Elena slid a secure hard drive into a powered-on terminal. Data began to transfer, progress bar crawling. Gunfire erupted outside the room, a muffled exchange of suppressed shots. Carter's team held their ground, bursts of light flickering in the dark hall. 70%, Elena hissed. "You've got 20 seconds, Carter warned. The corridor exploded with noise as an insurgent's AK barked uncontrolled rounds. One of the raiders grunted, dropping to a knee but staying in the fight. Carter dispatched the shooter with a single controlled burst. 95 done. Elena yanked the drive free, secured it in her vest. "Extract south exit," Carter ordered. They slipped into the hallway, moving fast, rifles ready. Sullivan's voice cut in. "Bravo, be advised, vehicle inbound east. Heavy machine gun, 30 seconds. "Change of plan," Carter growled. "West through maintenance." They bolted through a side door into the maintenance building. The smell of oil and rubber filled the air. That's when Elena saw the vehicles, gleaming Western SUVs with weapons mounts and encrypted comm gear. These weren't insurgent toys. These were American or Allied. Her stomach turned cold. "Master Sergeant," she said quietly, pointing. Carter took one look and nodded grimly. "Protocol Epsilon confirmed." The implication hit like a blow. Her father's ghosts weren't just insurgents. Someone on their own side wanted her dead. Gunfire flared outside, Alpha engaging the approaching technical. Carter led them through the shadows, out a side door and toward the fence. Tracer fire stitched the sky as the Blackhawks roared in from the west, summoned early. A burst of rounds chewed the dirt near her boots. Elena dropped, fired 2 controlled shots, then scrambled to her feet. Pain stabbed her ribs, but she pressed on. Hawkins's voice came through the radio, clipped but calm. "We've got your egress, northwest corner." They reached the perimeter cut, hearts hammering, lungs burning. Carter was last through, pausing to lob a smoke grenade that billowed thick gray plumes, masking their retreat. In the wadi, the Blackhawks hovered, rotors chopping sand into blinding clouds. Alpha elements fell back in bounding overwatch, covering Bravo's sprint. Carter shoved Elena toward the nearest bird. "Go." Inside the helicopter's dim cabin, adrenaline crashed into exhaustion. Elena's hands trembled as she clutched the hard drive. The pilot's voice crackled. "Inbound RPG, brace." The chopper banked hard, rotor wash screaming. A streak of fire passed under their tail rotor before disappearing into the night. Carter's voice was steady. "We're not clear yet, hold on." Elena's head rested briefly against the bulkhead. The metal was cool against her fevered skin. Through the small side window, the desert blurred past. She thought of her father's missing months, of Sullivan's haunted face, of Reynolds's quiet warning. Some secrets are buried so deep, people will kill generations to keep them there. Baghdad's lights appeared on the horizon, distant and fragile. In the headset, Sullivan's voice broke the silence. "Everyone accounted for." "Bravo's good," Carter replied. "Package secured." Elena managed a faint, grim smile. Package secured. That phrase had cost men their lives 16 years ago. Tonight it had cost blood again. When they landed, Thompson was waiting on the pad, his silver hair glinting under floodlights. His eyes swept the team, pausing on Alina. She handed him the hard drive without a word. He took it but didn't smile. In a secure room minutes later, technicians fed the drive's data into encrypted systems. Satellite images, memos, shipping manifests. The story unfolded on glowing screens. Western fingerprints on Iraqi chemical programs. Lists of names, corporate, governmental. And one photo, Marco Ramirez, alive and unbroken, standing in front of Facility 107 with a sealed case at his feet. Sullivan swore under his breath. Hawkins rubbed a hand over his face. Thompson simply stared. The implications rippled outward, beyond Baghdad, beyond Iraq. This wasn't just about insurgents or revenge. It was about decades-old choices, the kind governments bury under layers of patriotism and plausible deniability. Later, in the quiet of a dim barracks room, Alina sat on a cot, her bandaged arm cradled against her ribs. The adrenaline was gone now, leaving only pain and a gnawing hollowness. Hawkins leaned against the wall, silent. "I keep thinking about the interpreter," she said softly. "He looked terrified, but he still handed me that paper. He didn't even know me, just said my father would want me to have it." Hawkins studied her profile in the half-light. People do crazy things for the truth. She turned to him, eyes tired but burning. "Do they, or do they bury it when it's convenient?" For a moment, neither spoke. The base hummed quietly, a generator somewhere, a distant helicopter, the breathing of soldiers asleep in their bunks. Finally, Hawkins said, "Your dad carried this weight for 16 years. He tried to shield you from it. Now it's on you. What are you going to do with it?" Alina's gaze drifted to the small window, to the desert sky stretching infinite and unforgiving. "I'm going to finish what he started," she whispered. In another corner of the green zone, Thompson stared at the Babylon Protocol files. The images of corporate seals, signatures, and classified stamps felt like a betrayal he'd suspected but never confirmed. He knew what came next: denials, discrediting, possibly more blood. He also knew Ramirez was now a living liability to powerful men. Outside, Baghdad's night was deceptively calm. The city was always a heartbeat away from violence. Alina felt the weight of her father's shadow settle over her shoulders like a familiar cloak. For the first time since Mosul, the fear in her chest gave way to something harder: determination. The hunter's game wasn't finished, not by a long shot, and she was no longer content to be anyone's prey. What kind of silence follows a mission that rewrites your understanding of loyalty? The morning after Objective Sigma, Baghdad seemed almost peaceful. The sun rose over the blast walls, painting the sand-colored city in a forgiving light that didn't match the betrayal Alina carried in her chest. In a windowless briefing room, Thompson paced like a man wrestling with ghosts. Carter stood at parade rest, his broad shoulders rigid. Sullivan's eyes were rimmed red from lack of sleep. Hawkins leaned against the wall, arms crossed, jaw tight. "They'll bury this," Thompson said finally, his voice low. "Every line of those files, every signature were ghosts already. But make no mistake, they'll come for the living proof." His gaze flicked to Alina. She felt the weight of it, of being proof. Proof her father had risked everything for. Proof powerful men couldn't afford to leave breathing. "We can't just sit on this," she said, voice rough but steady. "If they erase us, it dies with us." Carter nodded. "We leak it, quiet channels, people we trust." Sullivan shook his head. "Leaking makes you a target faster. We need to verify, find allies first. Someone who can't be bought or silenced." "Those people don't exist," Hawkins muttered. Alina's hand tightened on the edge of the table. "Then we make them exist." The room went still, her words hanging in the stale air. It wasn't bravado, just resolve. That afternoon, a Black Hawk ferried Alina to a forward operating base outside Fallujah for evaluation. Officially, she was there for rehab and debriefing. Unofficially, the move scattered the pieces of their team before anyone could trace them. The ride over the desert was quiet, just the thrum of rotors and the occasional distant pop of small arms fire. She watched the city unfurl beneath her. Fallujah was scar tissue on the earth, block after block of bombed-out buildings, their walls pocked and hollow. It smelled of dust, diesel, and old war. At the FOB, medics checked her vitals while Marines cast sideways glances. 14 gunshot wounds was legend status, but legend made people wary. Some looked at her with awe, others with suspicion, wondering what kind of woman walks away from death like that. That night sleep came in broken shards. She woke to echoes of gunfire that weren't there, her hand reaching for a rifle that wasn't beside her bed. In the quiet, she remembered her father's voice on her 14th birthday. A Marine's weapon isn't just her rifle, it's her choices. The next morning, Carter arrived with 2 raiders. His presence was reassurance and warning. "They're stirring," he said. "We intercepted chatter, Protocol Epsilon isn't finished. Whoever's bankrolling this isn't running." She met his eyes, "Then neither am I." They sat on a low concrete barrier under the pale morning sun, the city's ruins stretching beyond the wire. Carter's voice softened. "You've seen more than most Marines see in a career. You don't have to keep walking into fire." She let out a breath that felt like surrender and defiance at once. "If I stop now, then all those dead Marines, the interpreter, my dad, they stay erased. I can't let that happen." He nodded, understanding without approval. "Then we need more than anger, we need a plan." Later, in a dusty storage room repurposed as a command post, Hawkins laid out a battered map. Sigma was just a node. There's a relay hub, Fallujah's industrial block, old telecom exchange. Intel says encrypted transmissions passed through there 3 times last week. Sullivan traced a route with his finger. "They'll expect an external raid. What if we go quiet, 2 teams, 1 distraction, 1 infiltration?" Carter's gaze shifted to Alina. "You shouldn't be on point with your injuries." She smiled faintly. "Shouldn't be alive either, yet here we are." That night the industrial block loomed like a dead city within a city. Concrete husks, twisted rebar, hollow windows staring like vacant eyes. The first team set a small fire 3 blocks east to draw attention. Shouts and gunfire echoed faintly as guards moved toward the distraction. Alina moved with Hawkins through the shadows, breath slow, rifle cradled tight. Pain flared with every step, but she embraced it. It meant she was still here. Inside the exchange, cables dangled from the ceiling like vines. Dust coated abandoned desks. A faint hum signaled active equipment deeper inside. They followed the sound, weaving through debris-strewn corridors until they reached a secured room. Hawkins knelt, tools in hand, and began working the lock. Alina kept watch, her heart a steady drumbeat in her ears. The door clicked. Inside, servers blinked quietly. Hawkins began a rapid download. Alina scanned the room, her eyes catching a dusty bulletin board on the far wall. Photos were pinned there, grainy surveillance shots. One showed her father shaking hands with a man in civilian clothes whose face was obscured. Another showed Alina herself, months before Mosul, sipping coffee at a base kiosk. Beneath it, a note in Arabic, confirmed lineage before extraction. Her stomach tightened. They hadn't just been tracking her. They doubted she was who they thought she was. The download hit 90% when a faint creak echoed from the hallway. Alina froze, rifle raised. 2 shadows stretched under the doorway. A boot nudged the door open. The first guard stepped through, eyes widening at the sight of her rifle. She fired once, center mass. The second lunged through, weapon raised, but Hawkins dropped him with 2 controlled bursts. The gunfire thundered through the empty building. "Move," Hawkins hissed. They bolted through the exchange, weaving between broken desks and cables. Outside, Carter's voice crackled over comms. "Compromised, exfil west route." They sprinted through the darkened streets, tracer fire sparking off walls behind them. A Raider Humvee screeched around a corner, door flying open. Alina dove inside as bullets shattered nearby glass. The vehicle roared away, tires kicking up dust. As they raced toward the fob, Alina clutched the new hard drive. Proof again. But proof felt fragile, like sand slipping through her fingers. Back at the base, Thompson examined the data under the harsh glow of a single lamp. His jaw tightened as names scrolled across the screen. Corporate executives, retired officers, a sitting senator, and one more photo, her father again, but this time the civilian's face was clear. A high-ranking intelligence official who had publicly condemned conspiracy theories for decades. Alina stared, rage and heartbreak colliding in her chest. Her father hadn't just been a soldier caught in a bad mission. He'd been part of something that could topple governments. Hawkins broke the silence. If they realize we have this, they'll scorch Earth to stop it. Thompson exhaled slowly. Then we need the Raiders again, full force. By dawn, whispers ran through the base. Marines sensed something brewing. Even the air seemed heavier. Alina sat on a low wall, rifle resting across her knees. She felt the weight of her wounds, the weight of expectation. Carter joined her, offering a canteen. "You holding up?" She sipped, then smiled faintly. "Define holding." He chuckled once, a dry sound. "We move tonight, storm the block where their safe house sits. But Ramirez, this isn't revenge, it's containment, understand?" She nodded, but deep inside another truth burned. This was personal now. Personal for her father, for the interpreter, for every Marine whose name wouldn't make headlines. As the sun dipped below Fallujah's horizon, the Raiders gathered, silent, lethal, a storm waiting to break. Helicopter rotors began their low growl. Alina tightened her vest straps, ignoring the ache in her ribs. The desert wind picked up, carrying dust and memory. She glanced once toward the city, its shattered skyline etched in gold. Somewhere out there, men were betting on her silence. They were about to learn how wrong they were. What do you call the moment before a storm when the air itself seems to brace? The rotor wash carved spirals of dust across the landing zone, and the Raiders moved with a silent urgency that didn't need words. Their black silhouettes blurred under the night vision green. Alina checked her rifle once more, fingers steady despite the dull ache in her side. Pain had become background noise. Fear, too. Carter crouched beside her as the Black Hawk dipped toward Fallujah's outskirts. "Remember containment. Get the files, neutralize threats, no civilian spillover." His voice carried the weight of a man who had buried too many friends. She gave a single nod. "Copy." The city unfurled beneath them, a patchwork of broken streets and smoldering ruins. The safe house squatted at the edge of the industrial block, a nondescript two-story building with boarded windows and a lone courtyard. But through Alina's scope, movement flickered, shapes sliding behind curtains, a glint of steel. They were awake, waiting. The Black Hawk skimmed low, dropping the Raiders in two waves. Boots kissed sand, rifles raised. The night was warm, tense, alive with unseen eyes. Alpha swept wide to establish a perimeter. Bravo, Carter, Hawkins, Alina, and 4 Raiders moved on the front door. A charge thumped, the door blew inward, and they flowed through like water. Inside, the air smelled of dust, sweat, and cheap tobacco. Shadows darted down a hallway, gunfire cracked, muzzle flashes searing brief snapshots of chaos. Alina pressed against a wall, fired twice, advanced. They cleared room after room. A kitchen with half-eaten flatbread on a table, a radio humming faint static, a stairwell echoing with retreating boots. On the second-floor landing, a figure appeared, civilian clothes, American-issue boots. He raised his weapon, then froze when he saw her face. "Ramirez," his voice trembled, edged with disbelief. She hesitated. "Who are you?" He lowered the rifle slightly. "Your father saved my life at Facility 107. His eyes darted to the hallway behind him. "They'll kill us both if we don't." A single suppressed shot cut him off. He crumpled without finishing the warning. Elena ducked, scanning for the shooter, but the corridor ahead was empty. "Contact rear stairwell," Hawkins shouted. The raiders pivoted, firing controlled bursts. 2 hostiles went down, but more poured from hidden rooms. Bullets chewed the plaster inches from her head. Carter's voice was calm amid the chaos. "Bravo, collapsed to room 3, north corner, defensible." They fell back, herding Hawkins through the doorway while Carter covered. Inside, an old desk served as cover. Elena reloaded, teeth gritted against the ache in her ribs. "They knew we were coming," Hawkins muttered. Elena's mind flashed back to the intercepted chatter, to Thompson's warning that someone inside might be feeding information. She swallowed the surge of anger. "We finished this," she said quietly. Another raider, Lopez, spotted a narrow service stair leading to the roof. Carter gestured. "Ramirez, Hawkins, you're with me. Lopez, flank east with 2. They climbed the stairwell, each step creaking like a confession. On the roof, the city stretched out in broken silhouettes. A pickup truck idled in the alley below, headlights off, its bed loaded with crates. 2 men were transferring something into a metal case. Through her scope, Elena recognized the embossed seal on the case, Babylon Protocol. Her breath hitched. That case was the heart of everything. Carter signaled 3 fingers, then a downward slice. On his mark, 3 rifles cracked in perfect unison. 2 targets dropped instantly. The case clanged onto the pavement. The pickup roared to life, tires screaming. Elena fired, shattering its rear window, but it vanished into the maze of alleys. Below, Lopez's team engaged a new wave of hostiles spilling into the courtyard. Tracer fire painted the walls. The raiders moved like a single organism, falling back in controlled bursts toward the exfil point. An RPG streaked from a nearby balcony. The blast rocked the building, sending dust and debris cascading across the rooftop. Elena slipped, catching herself on the parapet with a hiss of pain. Carter grabbed her vest, yanking her upright. They regrouped in the alley, retrieving the Babylon case. Hawkins checked its seal. Intact. "Then we're leaving," Carter said. His voice was iron. The Blackhawks thundered overhead, descending through a haze of dust and smoke. The raiders piled aboard, adrenaline and exhaustion etched on their faces. Elena collapsed onto the floor, clutching her rifle across her chest. In the chopper's dim cabin, she stared at the case resting between Carter's boots. It looked so ordinary, a metal box with a faded seal. Yet men had died tonight to protect or destroy whatever was inside. She thought of the civilian who had known her father, of his unfinished warning. Back at base, Thompson opened the case under harsh fluorescent lights. Inside, a small stack of documents, a hard drive, and most shocking, a weathered photograph. Elena's father stood beside 3 men in civilian clothes. One of them was the same intelligence official from the earlier files. Another was a current senator who had voted against every inquiry into Desert Storm conduct. "This isn't just about chemicals," Sullivan murmured. "It's blackmail, insurance." Elena's hands curled into fists. "Insurance my father died for." The room was heavy with the knowledge of what they now held. Carter looked at her. "This is bigger than us, bigger than the Corps." She met his gaze, voice low but steady. "Then we don't hide, we find the right eyes." That night she couldn't sleep. She sat outside on a concrete step, watching the stars. The desert wind carried distant echoes of gunfire. Hawkins joined her, silent for a long time before saying, "You saved us in there." She shook her head. "We saved each other." He studied her profile. "You could walk away, Ramirez, hand this off, disappear." She thought of her father's old footlocker, of her mother's quiet strength, of the interpreter's trembling hands. "Walking away isn't who I am." The next morning, Thompson gathered the team. "Command knows something's up," he warned. "We've been ordered back to Baghdad for debrief. They'll separate us, question us." "Then we move the evidence," Carter said, "before they take it." Hawkins glanced at Alina. "You trust anyone back at HQ?" She hesitated. One name surfaced, a former mentor now stationed at Al-Assad, a colonel who had once risked her career to expose a weapons scandal. "Colonel Dana Everett," she said. "If anyone still remembers what honor means, it's her." Thompson nodded. "Then Everett gets the case, quiet transfer, no comms." By dusk, Alina rode in the back of a Humvee, the Babylon case hidden under a medic's blanket at her feet. The road to Al-Assad stretched long and dangerous. Every checkpoint, every passing vehicle felt like a threat. She scanned the horizon, her body tense, her mind a storm. She thought of her father again, his laugh, his absences, the way he'd looked at her the day he shipped out for the last time. She wondered if he'd known it would come to this, that his daughter would inherit a secret that could tear nations apart. Halfway to Al-Assad, the convoy slowed, roadblock ahead, Iraqi police vehicles angled across the road. Carter's voice came over the radio. "Something off. No checkpoint scheduled here." Alina's fingers tightened on her rifle. The wind carried no voices, no movement, just the low idle of engines. The first raider stepped out cautiously, hand raised. A single shot cracked the night. The Marine dropped where he stood. Ambush. Bullets ripped through the darkness. Tires screeched. The Humvee jolted as Carter shouted for evasive maneuvers. Alina dove low, shielding the case with her body. Hawkins fired through the window, muzzle flashes lighting his determined face. They returned fire, using the Humvees as cover. A raider tossed a smoke grenade, the white plume billowing. Through the chaos, Alina spotted a figure retreating toward a waiting truck, a figure wearing American-issue body armor. Her chest clenched, and inside her, the truck roared away into the night, carrying more than just stolen rounds. It carried confirmation that their enemy was inside the wire. As the raiders regrouped, bodies and brass littered the road. Carter's voice cut through the ringing in her ears. "We move, now." Alina climbed back into the Humvee, clutching the Babylon case. The horizon ahead was a smear of darkness and promise. The truth was still theirs, for now, but the circle around them was tightening. She looked out at the stars, unblinking and cold. Somewhere beyond them, her father's memory watched. Somewhere ahead, men in suits and uniforms were already rewriting tonight's story. But Alina Ramirez was still breathing, still moving, and she wasn't finished yet. How do you trust a uniform when one of its own just tried to kill you? The Humvee rattled across broken asphalt, the desert wind knifing through bullet holes in the door. Alina gripped the Babylon case in her lap, every jolt sending pain through her stitched wounds. Outside, the world was a blur of sand and shadow. Inside, silence pressed heavier than the armor plates around them. Carter sat in the passenger seat, his jaw set hard enough to crack teeth. Hawkins drove, knuckles white on the wheel. In the back, Lopez cradled a rifle across his knees, eyes scanning the horizon for headlights that didn't belong. "They were police uniforms," Lopez said finally, voice low. "No," Hawkins corrected. "They were wearing them doesn't mean they were." Alina stared at the road stretching into darkness. One of them had American armor. She didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. The words dropped like stones in water. Carter's eyes flicked to her, unreadable behind the green glow of the dashboard. "We stay moving, Al-Assad or nowhere." The rest of the drive was quiet except for the occasional distant echo of gunfire carried on the wind, a reminder that Fallujah never really slept. When they finally rolled into Al-Assad's perimeter hours later, the base lights felt almost surreal, like a mirage. Colonel Dana Everett met them at a rear entrance, flanked by two trusted Marines. The hard lines of her face softened slightly when she saw Alina. "Staff Sergeant Ramirez," she said quietly. "I've been hearing whispers. You brought me a storm, didn't you?" Alina held out the Babylon case. "I brought you proof." In Everett's office, a dim, secure room lined with old maps, Carter set the case on the desk and cracked the seal. Everett leafed through the contents, her expression a mask that gave away nothing, until she reached the photograph of the senator. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "This will destroy careers," Everett murmured, "and get people killed if we're not careful." "It's already getting people killed," Alina replied. Everett studied her for a long moment. "You're your father's daughter." Something in Alina's chest tightened. "You knew him." "Knew of him," Everett corrected. "The SEAL teams whispered his name even after Facility 107. He saved lives. He also made powerful enemies." The colonel closed the case and looked at Carter. "I'll get this to someone I trust outside the chain. Until then, you're ghosts. No comms, no paper trail. They'll be watching every feed." Carter nodded. "We'll stay dark." That night, Alina lay on a borrowed cot in an empty supply room, staring at the corrugated metal ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. Her mind replayed the convoy ambush, the man in American armor, the civilian in the safe house who hadn't finished his warning. Every unanswered question was a weight pressing on her ribs. In the stillness, Hawkins sat nearby, cleaning his rifle. The familiar click of metal on metal was almost soothing. "You ever wonder if we're fighting for the right side?" she asked quietly. He paused, the question hanging in the stale air. "All the time." "Then why keep fighting?" He glanced at her, his eyes tired but steady. "Because the people next to me are worth it, even when the people above me are." Something in her chest eased. She didn't need speeches or slogans, just that simple truth. At dawn, Everett's aide slipped into the supply room. "Colonel wants you," he said. In her office, Everett looked graver than before. "The case is gone." The room seemed to tilt. "Gone?" Carter demanded. "I locked it in a secure container," Everett said, her tone clipped. "When I returned 15 minutes later, the lock was intact, but the contents, every document, every drive, replaced with blank paper and a broken flash drive." Hawkins swore softly. "They're already inside this base." Everett's eyes hardened. "And that means the people hunting you are closer than we thought. We're burned here." A knock on the door interrupted them. A Marine runner with a routine report. Everett dismissed him, then turned back. "I can buy you 12 hours. After that, command will start asking questions I can't deflect. You need to disappear." "Disappear where?" Lopez asked. Alina spoke before she could stop herself. "The Habanea ruins." Carter shot her a questioning look. "My father mentioned them once," she said. "Said if everything ever went sideways, there was a place no one would look. Old British airbase ruins near the lake. He never explained why." Everett nodded slowly. "It's off the grid and close enough you can move fast." They left before sunrise, slipping out in 2 unmarked vehicles. The desert unfolded around them, vast and indifferent. By mid-morning, the ruins rose from the sand, crumbling hangars, rusted airfield lights, the skeleton of a control tower leaning against the sky. Inside one hangar, they found what her father had meant, a hidden alcove behind a collapsed wall. Inside, under decades of dust, was a battered footlocker. Alina knelt, heart pounding, and opened it. Inside lay a bundle of letters, a faded map, and a cassette tape marked only with a date, March 1991. Her hands trembled as she fed the tape into a field recorder. Her father's voice crackled through static, deeper, younger, but unmistakable. "If you're hearing this," he said, "then Babylon Protocol wasn't buried deep enough. They'll come for you even if you're my blood. Trust sparingly. Move faster than their lies, and remember, sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts." The hangar's silence felt sacred. Alina closed her eyes, hearing her father's ghost as clearly as if he stood beside her. When she opened them, Carter was watching her. "We use this," he said quietly, "not just for proof, for leverage." Outside, the wind howled over the ruins, a reminder of how fragile all their lives had become. They were outnumbered, out-resourced, and hunted by men who controlled the narrative. But for the first time since Mosul, Elena felt a flicker of control, a path, however dangerous. They spent the day scanning and encrypting the letters and map, splitting the files between drives hidden in separate gear. That night, under a sky littered with stars, Elena sat on a cracked runway, the old map spread across her knees. Hawkins joined her, boots scuffing the concrete. "You okay?" he asked. She traced a faded line on the map with her finger. "Okay's not really on the table anymore." He smiled faintly. "You're tougher than half the Marines I've served with." She shook her head. "I'm just too stubborn to quit." In the distance, a helicopter's distant thrum grew louder. Carter appeared at the hangar entrance, eyes sharp. "Scouts, not ours." The raiders scrambled, gathering gear, extinguishing lanterns. The wind carried faint voices, the crunch of tires on gravel. They slipped into the night, ghosts among ruins. Somewhere behind them, men searched for a trail they hoped had gone cold. Somewhere ahead, the truth waited, fragile and explosive. As the desert swallowed them, Elena tightened her grip on her rifle and her father's map. The storm wasn't over. It was only gathering. How long can you outrun a lie before it reshapes the world around you? The desert wind lashed their faces as two unmarked vehicles cut silent tracks toward the Euphrates. The stars above seemed coldly amused, bearing witness to betrayals older than anyone in the convoy. Elena sat in the backseat, the map folded in her lap, her father's cassette still echoing in her mind. Trust sparingly. Move faster than their lies. Hawkins drove without headlights, following Carter's taillights through darkness. Lopez scanned the horizon through night vision goggles, his knuckles pale where they gripped the rifle. Every shadow was a threat now, every silence a setup. After 2 hours, they abandoned the vehicles in a dry riverbed and continued on foot. The ruins and roads behind them would be swarming with search parties by dawn. They needed high ground and a radio that wasn't compromised. They climbed a low ridge overlooking the river. Below, a fishing village dozed under moonlight, the faint smell of smoke drifting from dying cook fires. To the east, faint lights blinked on a distant highway, too orderly to be local traffic. Carter crouched, studying the horizon through binoculars. Convoy, military pattern, they're hunting. Elena's stomach tightened. "Ours." "Not anymore," he replied. They hunkered down until the vehicles passed out of sight. When they moved again, they stayed close to the river's edge, using reeds and rocks as cover. By dawn, they found a crumbling watchtower, British-era concrete, weathered but stable. Carter signaled them inside. The tower smelled of bat droppings and old war. Sunlight sliced through narrow slits, painting stripes across the dusty floor. Hawkins set up a portable antenna, carefully shielding it from open sight. Lopez unpacked rations with mechanical efficiency. Elena unrolled the map on the floor, tracing faded lines with her finger. Her father's handwriting marked 3 points: Sigma, the safe house, and one final location, Takadam Airfield. Next to it, a single word in block letters: Ledger. She stared at it, pulse quickening. This is what they're afraid of. Carter joined her, crouching to see. "Ledger." "Not a code name," she said. "A record, names, payments, deals. My father wanted it hidden here." Hawkins looked up from the antenna. "Then that's where they'll be waiting." She met his gaze, determination sharpening her tired features. "Then that's where we finish it." By midday, Carter made contact with Everett through a secure frequency. Her voice, distorted by static, carried urgency. "Command spinning a narrative says you went rogue, stole classified intel, engaged friendly forces. Orders are out for your arrest." Hawkins cursed under his breath. Everett continued, "They'll use the Marines themselves to clean this up. I can't shield you anymore." Carter glanced at Elena. "We move tonight." As dusk settled over the desert, they approached Takadam from the west, using an abandoned drainage canal for cover. The airfield lay like a ghost city, hangars silhouetted against the last smear of sunlight, runways cracked and overgrown. A single warehouse still showed signs of life, faint light leaking from its seams, a hum of generators. They slipped inside through a broken side door. The smell of dust and diesel hit them first. Stacks of crates towered like silent sentinels. In the far corner, a steel vault door stood ajar, faint light spilling from within. Alina's breath caught. Inside, under a flickering bulb, stood 3 men in civilian clothes, and one in a Marine officer's uniform. On the table between them rested a thick black ledger. The officer looked up first. Recognition flickered across his face. Ramirez. She kept her rifle trained, her voice steady. "You killed Marines to protect a book." His jaw tightened. "This isn't about a book. It's about stability, about keeping this country from tearing itself apart." Carter stepped forward, voice low and dangerous. "You call ambushing your own stability." One of the civilians, a man with gray temples and a tailored jacket, sneered. "You don't understand the scale. Governments fall when truth is unrestrained." Alina took a step closer, "And families fall when truth is buried." A sudden movement, one of the civilians reaching for a pistol, shattered the standoff. Hawkins fired first. Chaos erupted. Bullets sparked off crates, tearing splinters from wood. Carter shoved Alina toward cover as rounds hissed past. She hit the ground, pain flaring in her side, but kept her rifle steady. 2 controlled shots, 1 man down. Another tried to flee with the ledger, but Lopez intercepted him, a single burst dropping him in the doorway. The officer, face twisted with rage, lunged for the ledger, snatching it from the table. He bolted toward a side exit. Alina scrambled to her feet, ignoring the scream of torn muscles, and gave chase. The warehouse's back corridor was a tunnel of dust and echoes. The officer sprinted, his boots pounding. Alina's breath was ragged, her vision narrowing. She fired once, miss. The second shot grazed his shoulder, spinning him. He stumbled but kept moving. They burst outside into the cool night. The officer reached a waiting truck, engine running. Alina closed the distance, slamming her shoulder into him before he could climb in. They hit the dirt hard, the ledger skidding away. He rolled, drew a knife, and slashed. Pain burned across her forearm. She gritted her teeth, catching his wrist and twisting. The blade clattered to the ground. For a moment their faces were inches apart, the betrayer and the betrayed. "You don't know what you're unleashing," he hissed. She drove her elbow into his jaw hard. He went limp. Carter and Hawkins arrived, rifles sweeping the shadows. Alina stood shakily, clutching the ledger. Blood dripped from her arm, but her grip on the book was iron. "Contact inbound," Lopez's voice shouted over comms. In the distance, engines roared, reinforcements. Carter's orders were crisp. "We exfil east. Raiders move." They sprinted across cracked pavement, weaving between rusted fuel tanks and abandoned vehicles. The airfield came alive with headlights and shouts. Bullets snapped through the darkness. At the drainage canal, they slid down the embankment, boots skidding on loose gravel. Hawkins fired short bursts over the rim, buying seconds. The raiders splashed through shallow water, lungs burning. Behind them, searchlights swept the airfield. Voices shouted in English and Arabic, commands to spread out to find the traitors. Alina clutched the ledger to her chest. The weight of it was more than paper and ink. It was history demanding to be reckoned with. When they reached a cluster of abandoned barracks, they ducked inside to catch their breath. Carter checked the team. No casualties beyond scrapes and bruises. He looked at Alina. "That book is a death sentence if we keep it." She wiped blood from her arm. "It's a death sentence if we don't." Outside, the night was alive with engines and radios. The circle was closing. But for the first time since Mosul, Alina felt something like clarity. The ledger wasn't just her father's unfinished fight. It was every Marine who had died believing the truth would matter. She looked around at the faces of the men who'd risked everything tonight. Carter's steady resolve, Hawkins's quiet loyalty, Lopez's wary determination. "We finished this," she said softly. And in the silence that followed, the raiders, outnumbered, hunted, and bone-tired, nodded. The storm was far from over, but they would meet it head-on, even if the world never knew their names. What happens when the truth finally has a heartbeat? Dawn crept over the desert, turning the cracked runways of Takadam into ribbons of pale gold. Alina crouched in the abandoned barracks, the ledger clutched tight against her chest. Outside, searchlights swept the horizon, hunting phantoms. The air smelled of dust and diesel, war's constant perfume. Carter's voice was low but urgent. "We can't stay here. The circle's closing." Lopez peered through a broken window. Convoys approaching from the north and west, at least 3. Hawkins checked his rifle, jaw tight. "They're sweeping east. We'll be cut off in 30 minutes. Alina's mind raced. The ledger was proof, but only if it lived past today. She unfolded her father's map again, tracing the faded lines with her finger. The lake shimmered faintly in the distance, and beyond it, an old radio relay tower marked decades ago for decommission. She looked up. "The tower. If we can get a signal out before they jam the area, Everett can grab it. Even if they catch us, the truth gets out." Carter studied her for a beat, then nodded. "Then that's our play." They slipped from the barracks like shadows, moving low and fast along a drainage ditch. Every step was a reminder of their bodies' limits, stitches tugging, bruises burning, breath coming ragged. But no one complained. Marines didn't need speeches when survival was on the line. As the sun climbed, the heat pressed down like a physical weight. The tower loomed closer, a rusted skeleton against a blue sky. Alina's stomach churned at the sight of tire tracks fresh in the sand near its base. "They've been here," Hawkins whispered. Carter gestured for silence, signaling the team into a wide flanking arc. They approached cautiously, rifles sweeping the ruins. At the base of the tower, a small generator hummed beside a comms crate, recent, not abandoned. Someone had set a trap. Lopez spotted it first, a thin tripwire glinting in the sunlight. He froze, then carefully traced it to a set of charges buried beneath loose sand. They wired the perimeter. Carter's mouth tightened. "They're expecting us." Alina's heart pounded. She looked at the tower, the sky, the horizon shrinking with enemy convoys. Her father's voice from the tape echoed in her head. "Move faster than their lies." She crawled forward on her belly, slow and deliberate, using her knife to lift the tripwire and slide the ledger under. Hawkins cursed softly but followed her lead, holding the wire while she passed. One by one, the team crossed, until they were inside the perimeter. Carter planted a small antenna on the tower's base, connecting it to Hawkins's secure transmitter. Static hissed. Hawkins adjusted frequencies, searching for a clear channel. "Signal's weak," he muttered. "Jamming's heavy." Alina crouched beside him, hands steady on the ledger. "Boost the gain, push through." The first convoy appeared on the horizon, a cloud of dust and sunlight glinting off armored roofs. The raiders took positions among the ruins, their rifles aimed at approaching dots that would soon be men. "Signal at 40%, Hawkins said. "Come on." Gunfire cracked in the distance, scouts making first contact. Carter's voice was calm steel. "Hold your fire until they're closer. Make every shot count." The trucks closed in, engines growling like predators. Alina felt the weight of the ledger, the ghosts of the men who had died for it, and the quiet strength of her father's voice. This was never about glory. It was about doing what should be done. The first truck crossed a broken section of tarmac and exploded, a plume of fire and smoke tearing the morning apart. Lopez had planted a charge on their approach route. The second truck veered, its gunner firing wildly. Carter dropped him with a single shot. "Signal's clear," Hawkins shouted, "transmitting now." Alina pressed the ledger to the scanner. Pages flicked by under the beam, their secrets pouring into the ether. Somewhere far from this desert, a secure receiver lit up with everything they'd risked their lives for. The enemy surged, pouring from vehicles, using wreckage for cover. Bullets cracked against concrete, sending shards into the air. Alina fired, exhaled, fired again, controlled, deliberate. Pain throbbed through her side, but she stayed on target. A round struck near Hawkins's position, ricocheting into his leg. He went down with a grunt, dragging himself behind cover. Lopez crawled through debris to pull him back, his own arm bleeding from a grazing shot. Transmission at 60%, Hawkins hissed, teeth clenched. Carter shifted to cover them, dropping two more hostiles. The air filled with the bitter tang of gunpowder and the distant wail of approaching reinforcements. Alina's breath came ragged. She thought of her mother, who would wake soon back home, unaware her daughter might already be a headline. She thought of her father's photo, the man who had chosen silence over betrayal, and she thought of every Marine who'd trusted the system to do right. 85%, Hawkins called. A grenade clattered nearby. Carter lunged, kicking it away just as it detonated, the blast rattling the tower. Dust choked the air. Transmission complete, Hawkins shouted. Alina grabbed the ledger and slung it over her shoulder. Then we move. They fell back toward the drainage ditch, firing in controlled bursts to slow pursuit. A bullet grazed Alina's shoulder, spinning her sideways. She stumbled but kept running. Carter covered the rear, calm and lethal. At the ditch, a Blackhawk thundered into view. Everett had sent help. Its rotors churned the desert into chaos as a door gunner laid suppressing fire. The raiders scrambled aboard one by one. Carter shoved Alina inside last, diving after her as rounds sparked off the helicopter's frame. As they lifted off, the airfield receded, a scarred patch of earth holding too many secrets. Below, the enemy scattered, too late to stop what had already left their reach. Inside the helicopter, Hawkins gritted his teeth as Lopez tightened a tourniquet around his leg. Carter leaned back against the bulkhead, sweat streaking the dust on his face. Alina sat on the floor, the ledger across her lap. Her hands trembled, not from fear now, but from release. Everett's voice crackled through the headset. Transmission received. Redundant backups confirmed. You did it. Alina closed her eyes for a moment, letting the words sink past the noise. For the first time since Mosul, the weight in her chest eased. Not gone, never gone, but lighter. Back in Baghdad, the team was quietly dispersed. Everett arranged false orders, scattering them to different bases, erasing their presence from logs. The official story would tell of a minor skirmish, nothing more. The world would never know the details. But in a locked server room somewhere far away, the ledger now existed in a dozen encrypted copies, waiting for the day the truth would matter. That night, Alina stood alone on a rooftop overlooking the city. Baghdad's lights shimmered like distant constellations, fragile and beautiful. She thought of her father's tape, the calm resolve in his voice. She thought of the civilian who had died trying to warn her. And she thought of the men who had chosen silence, power, and betrayal over conscience. Hawkins limped up beside her, leaning on a borrowed crutch. You think it'll change anything? She didn't answer at first. The desert wind tugged at her hair, carrying the faint echoes of a city still scarred by war. Finally, she said, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but truth doesn't stay buried forever. He looked at her, tired but faintly smiling. And you? She met his gaze. I'll keep breathing, keep moving. That's what Marines do. Below, a distant call to prayer wove through the city's hum. Alina watched the horizon until the first hint of dawn painted the sky in soft hues. She didn't need medals or headlines. She didn't need the world to know her name. The ledger would speak when the time was right. She turned to leave, her silhouette a small, determined line against the vast sky. Somewhere in the ruins of Habania, her father's ghost was probably smiling, a quiet acknowledgement that some promises outlive the men who make them. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.